Hey guys, it's Brindley and happy Monday night. I hope the weather is a little bit sunnier where you are, where I am right now. It's a little gray and rainy, but those days are always good too. So I'm excited tonight's topic. I've thought about it a lot, and it's funny how I come up with these topics and then the universe, God just brings things that just continue to remind me and teach me around these lessons, because I truly believe that none of this is you hear it once, you learn it. I always say that when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, and the teacher will remain until the lesson is learned. And so what happens is we have circumstances and situations in which we have the opportunity to learn the lesson. And if we don't learn the lesson, then those situations and circumstances will continue to happen. And so tonight, I wanted to talk about ego, because ego is something that I had a big one. And that's what I always thought. And I was always told that. I was always told that because of my drinking and self-centeredness and selfishness, that I had a massive ego and all I thought about was myself, and I bragged all the time and I wanted everyone to look at me and I wanted to be the center of attention. And although all those things were true back then, when I decided to start on a path of rebuilding myself and rebuilding my life, I had to start to begin to study the ego and change my perception around it, which is, it's funny. It's like I almost had to change the attachment that I had to ego, which ego is what causes us to attach to things. So it's kind of a catch-22. And I had to start studying what healthy ego was. And I always say to choose a mentor in an area. When you want to learn about something, choose a mentor that knows it well. And you don't necessarily have to know them. Some of my greatest mentors I've never met, I've never had a conversation with, yet when I sought out to learn something or to grow through something, I sought out their books, their publications, their readings, their podcasts, their whatever I could to learn from them, because they had mastered that subject. And the person for me on ego was Eckhart Tolle, Tolle. And if you haven't read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, I highly recommend it. I actually was drawn to this book, ironically, right before I went to Italy 2 years ago. And I did a 10, 12-day trip in Italy by myself. And I read this book while I was on that trip. And it really started to transform the way that I looked at myself, the way I looked at others, and the way I viewed ego. Because see, our egos, sometimes we're raised to think that ego means, look at me, and it's very braggart, and it's, everybody needs to look at me and I'm the best at everything. And we say people have big egos and their egos let them, got a hold of them, and their ego took over and they were so in their ego. And the reality is your ego is what prevents you from being your highest and best self. It's a feeling of separation. It's almost a sense of duality. It's the idea of being distinct and different from others. And what our ego will do is it will show us and make us think how different we are, to the point that it will prevent us from becoming our best selves. So when I say eliminating growth opportunities is your ego, that's exactly what your ego does. Your ego wants to prevent you from being your best self. And it wants to prevent you based on what you've learned in the past or what you're worried about in the future. It wants to prevent you from growing in the now and being in the now. Because when you're in the present, and we'll talk about this, your ego cannot exist. Ego and presence cannot exist at the same time, because your ego is fed by what's happened or what's coming. So it's a false perception of yourself that separates you, and you almost have to view it as a separate self. You almost have to become an observer in order to be in the present mind. And again, if you want this more in depth and more explained, read his book, The Power of Now. So if we can come to a place in which we realize that ego is neither good, ego is neither bad, it's something that's in all of us, and it is the thing that wants to prevent us from becoming our highest and best selves. So when we switch our view of ego, then we're able to start overcoming things, because then we can ask ourselves, is this ego preventing me from becoming my highest and best? Is this my ego preventing me from growing? And if it is, how do I get out of ego and get into the present moment so that I can move forward? And there's a couple ways that you do that. The first in which is you observe your mind. So the ego is always going to happen in the mind. And it's a form of awareness in which we think we're different, or we compare ourselves to others. So we have to observe our mind. We have to observe what's actually occurring so that we can distinguish between the voice of the ego and what the actual situation is. So what's really happening versus what our ego is telling us, so that we can act upon what the reality is and not what our ego is holding us back from. So for instance, I'll use, a lot of you know I'm on this health journey right now, and I'll use running as an example. I was in a horrific car accident when I was 30 years old, about, I won't date myself, but I was 30, that's all you need to know. And I flipped a Murano upside down and woke up on a major highway, and I smashed my entire left ankle. So my entire left ankle has pins, plates, all sorts of things in it. And I was told by the doctor at the time that he was worried that I would never run, jump, or wear high heels again. And I took that, and my ego allowed it to become a story that I told myself over the years, so that I wouldn't have to do what I hated more than anything, which was exercise. And when I started observing my thoughts around exercise and observing my thoughts around health, I started to say, okay, where is my ego inserting itself that's preventing me from becoming my highest and best in the area of health and exercise? And it was that ankle. And guys, the truth is, like, I can run 20 minutes straight now, up hills, down hills, on gravel. And am I in a little bit of uncomfortable pain? Probably, yeah. And is it unbearable? Does it prevent me from running? No. Is it going away the more I run? Yes, because my ankle's becoming stronger. So it can be, I use that as an example because it doesn't have to be this grandiose thing. It could simply be a story that you've been telling yourself that your ego is using to prevent you from moving forward. So again, it goes back to that story wheel that we've talked about. Ask yourself, what stories is my ego creating that are preventing me from being highest and best? Once you've started observing your mind and you distinguish between what is actual and what is ego, that's when you have to start releasing those limiting beliefs, right? We all have them. We all have the what ifs. We all have the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. We all have the stories of the ankle, things that we have created in order to justify our inaction. And so we have to identify what those are. We have to detach from them. See, the ego wants us to attach to limiting beliefs and give them meaning, because then that means that we won't move forward. So we have to detach from them. In order to do that, we have to bring awareness, right? We have to bring the awareness that we have these limiting beliefs, and that those limiting beliefs are being placed there by our ego that wants to hold us back. Here's the other thing. Fighting with your ego will only make it stronger. Fighting with your ego will only make it stronger. When you declare war on your ego, right, and you're like, I am going to overconquer the world, you make it an enemy. And the truth is that we want ego. Ego is what helps us in the good also. Ego can also be used when it's used and it's not coexistence with present. It's part of who we are. It's part of what makes us move forward. It's part of us, what makes us think, become aware of things, prevents us, and gives us the opportunity to be aware of our limiting beliefs. So the best way to, let's say, overcome the negative aspects of your ego is to get present, to be in the present moment. And this goes back to what we talked about being a human being instead of a human doing. And it's being present in the moment, because the ego only lives in the past and in the future. It only lives in the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and it only lives in the what ifs. But if we're in the present moment, it cannot exist. So there's only right now. right now truly is the only time that matters, because you can't change the past and you can't predict the future. So when there is this pure form of being in the present, it is very difficult for our ego to take over, because we're not creating stories, and stories is where our ego loves to live. Your ego exists because of your thoughts. So if we go back again to mindset and we talk about our thoughts, remember, we can't control our first thought, but we can control our second. And instead of letting our ego come in and control that second thought, we want to get present in the moment and tell that second thought to tell that first thought, we don't think like that anymore. And I find myself doing this a lot, guys, that when a thought comes or my ego wants to tell me that something's bad or I'm not good enough or wants me to attach to something and give it strong meaning that's going to hold me back, I almost have to self-talk my way out of it. And you can go back and watch some of the previous videos where we talked about self-talk. We talked about mindset. We talked about human being versus human doing. So it's getting into that mindset of being able to self-talk yourself out of it, because you've checked in, you know that it's not true. It's your ego telling you something based on your limiting beliefs and based on your prior programming. Remember, we have to give ourselves grace, because the majority of our actions, thoughts, and behaviors were not created by us. They were programmed through the way that we were raised, so our experiences, the way we were programmed by our parents, our educators, our influencers, anyone and everything, our circumstances. And now what we're getting the opportunity to do is to reverse that programming. And part of that is getting the ego in alignment. The lesson here is that the stronger your ego manifests, the more probability you have to believe that other people or other things are the source of all the problems in your life. So when you are in a victim mindset of thinking that everybody else is to blame for your life, everybody else has caused the problems, that is your ego. That is your ego deflecting and putting it on everyone else, so that you don't have to truly look at yourself and say, what's my part? Where's my ownership? And therefore, it's holding you back again from achieving what? Your highest and best self. So as your ego relaxes, as you get more into the present, then you move further away from these delusions, and you become to realize that you are the creator of your situations, of your life. And therefore, you can start to dissolve the blame and the ego, the thoughts that the ego creates. And that's when liberation and freedom becomes possible. That's when I was finally able, when I was able to identify what was ego and what ego was doing to prevent me from achieving my highest and best. That's when I was able to make some massive changes in my life. But this also required, guys, a level of humility and vulnerability to say, I'm not perfect, right? I'll say it, like that car accident when I was 30 was my fault. I was drinking and driving and I flipped a Murano. That was my fault. And yet my ego was able to take something like that, forget that it was my fault and that I caused it, and blame the fact that I couldn't run on an ankle that I broke in an accident that I caused. And yet the power and the freedom comes when we're able to say, I'm not perfect. I'm perfectly imperfect. Now let's get busy and figure out what's holding me back and get into the now and what I can do now in the present moment to be better than I was yesterday and to get prepared for what I'm going to be tomorrow. And that's when we truly can start to see that the ego disseminates. We start to detach meaning from things. We start to not care as much about what other people think. People's opinions don't define who we are, and we start to become more comfortable and more centered with ourselves. So remember, ego is not good. It is not bad. It just is. And it is the thing that prevents you from becoming your highest and best self. So I would challenge you tonight to ask yourself, what is it that's standing in the way of me being my highest and best self in any area? Pick an area of your life, spiritually, physically, mentally, professionally? What is it that's standing in my way of becoming my highest and best? And where is my ego showing up in this? And what can I do to get in the now and get in the present to eliminate the ego so I can move forward towards my highest and best? So hope this was helpful, guys. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Bye.